a look around. We have the saddle fitter coming today. We still have snow on the ground. We are trying to get the barn chores done fairly early this morning so we can get ready for the saddle fitter who's coming to fit Zephyr's saddle and Nemo's new saddle and TJ. And we are going to bring you along with that today, along with some of the rides. Next week we have the farrier, the chiropractor, and Elizabeth Rigsby will be back for the PEMF. Yay! What do you think?
Oh, it definitely feels better to me. His whole kind of personality is better. It's just kind of like the softness of his skin. You can tell that he's happier.
Tara, how long have you been a saddle fitter?
Saddle fittings, about 4.5 years. It'll be 5 this fall.
And you also do massage also?
Yes. And I'll be adding, so the emphasis in the massage program, which I will have completed as of the end of May, it will be 2 years since I finished the first program. And then I've added, it was a sports massage basis, based on the principles of Jack Moore and Hudabe. And then I've done a lot of continuing ed classes since then. Focusing a lot on the fascial systems, and then in May I'll be taking the first level of the equine craniosacral program with the Upliger Institute.
Those sound like very fancy words.
Big words, yes.
What do you find most commonly with saddle issues? Like people get too wide of a tree, too narrow of a tree, too narrow of a tree.
I'd say overwhelmingly it's usually too narrow.
Okay. What would you say is the worst attribute to have in a saddle? Too wide or too narrow?
Too narrow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. If it's too narrow, it's going to place you in very awkward positions for the horse. I mean, they're both not good, but I can work with one that's too wide much more easily than I can with one that's too narrow.
Okay.
Because if you think about it from the principle of you're wearing shoes that are too small,
right,
and you go and put on thick winter socks.
Okay.
You've just made everything worse. But if it's a little big, then you can put on that little bit of a thicker sock, and you might make it work for a little bit. And there's different attributes. I think one of the biggest misconceptions with saddle fitting is that it is not an exact science. You know, the horse is always constantly changing. This is a live creature with live muscles, and they're just like us. You know, we'll go through periods of where, our belt loops might be one hole tighter than other times. You know, I mean, they go kind of through the same things. And so it's always kind of a process, and it always boils down to, kind of what the horse is thinking and feeling. You can have a saddle that fits by the book. The horse reads a different book. And he's like, no, that's not how I like my clothes to fit. So you have to kind of take a lot of different things into consideration. And sometimes the better fit is one that's a little bit wide, and we just add a little bit of a shim. That's what the horse prefers. That's what he feels more comfortable in. That's what he's going to perform better in. And then some horses are the opposite. They like a kind of a tight-knit, closer fit. When you have one that's too narrow, you tend to put a lot of pressure right here at the base of the wither, and you affect several different muscles that affect the shoulder sling. It also will put you in more of a chair seat and focus the center of your weight back here, closer to the end of the thoracic vertebrae and into the lumbar, which starts to affect with their hind end movement. So to me, that's kind of the worst one because it's harder to deal with, whereas one that may be fitting pretty well tree-wise, but maybe just a little bit wide, we can pad and shim or add a little extra flocking. I mean, that's usually easier to work with, so long as we're not talking several tree sizes too wide.
And he's got a short back, so he's hard to fit.
He's got a short back, so he's a little bit more of a challenge. So with him, we're going to look at many different things that we're going to take into consideration. Saddle so that it's not bearing weight past the last thoracic vertebrae and interfering with the lumbar and hind end movement. But at the same time, there may be a little bit of a compromise there because of just how short his back is. But that's why you have to look at every horse as an individual. There are some horses that cannot tolerate anything past that last vertebrae, and then there are some that based on how they're built and how they move, and if we can keep that weight centered where the horse is best built to carry it, which is a little bit closer through here, then it may not be an issue. But bottom line is what this guy says he's able to tolerate before I'm under, huh? Just the shape of this one a little bit.
Because it's tight on the shoulder?
It's a little tight on the shoulder, and the way that these tree points are kind of angled, they're kind of a little bit more angled in this way instead of being kind of more out.
Okay.
And so it kind of is going to want to clamp right there in the wither.
This is the one he's been riding in with shims and pads.
Which we also know doesn't fit perfectly as well.
Right. Depends on the day.
Love the pick. Okay, let's go with that. I love that with the profile on it. Oh, here's a little thing for you. Saddle pads, man. No horse. I don't care if it's mutton withered, barely has one, or has a high wither. I want a wither profile on those saddle pads. What I find, those ones that are cut straight across tend to really pull down on the horse, whether or not they have a wither per se. So always look for that wither.
Look what Hannah got. She's in the Rose Gold 1K Club.
Love those. Every horse is different. This is why we have to have a written portion of saddle fit evaluation, because everything can change when the horse is in motion. I've seen it a number of times where I'll have a couple saddles that I put on statically when someone's shopping. And I remember one specific example where I had a saddle ranked 1, 2, 3, how I liked it statically. In motion, I liked it the exact opposite. That horse's body changed so much when he was moving versus when he was standing still.
She'll get him. She'll stop.
So in this case, as you watch when he's standing, you can really see where that saddle sits a little low in the cantle and puts the bounce a little far back. But when he's actually in motion and when he lifts that lower back, it actually kind of comes up to it. So I don't actually want to add a shim right now.
Okay.
I don't want to change anything. I think what I liked when I was watching him go is that he was finding he had room to lift his back now.
Okay.
And I saw him trying to reach in. I saw him reaching over through his back. And to me, that's one of the things that I look for in the ridden part is where is that putting the rider? How is the horse responding? Am I getting any resistance? Am I looking for a horse who's looking for contact? Is he looking to go over his back? Or is he pinning his ears back when we go for transitions? I look for those types of signs. And I'm watching the saddle, like is it staying relatively symmetrical? Is it moving over to one side? But when we go to the other side, is it moving that way equally? Or am I seeing it more on one side versus the other? Sometimes it's saddle, sometimes it's strength and training and balance of the horse, sometimes it's even rider. So there's a lot of different things that we kind of look at and take into consideration. But for me, we know we have some challenges with the balance of that saddle naturally, just that's built in the design of that saddle. And then other parts is he looked pretty relaxed and happy, and he was trying to give her a nice round movement and contact. And to me, that puts us where he's comfortable. That's what he tells me.
Okay.
And so I'm good with staying there while we continue to shop for something that's going to help her out.
Help her. So Tara, what are some telltale signs that I should bring a saddle fitter out to look at my saddle, like the horse might be displaying?
So typically, some of the things that you can look for is is in your horse's behavior, and it can start from the moment that you're grooming and tacking up. When that horse starts to get a little upset when you go to put the saddle on, or when you're tightening the girth, that can be a telltale sign that there's something kind of going on. Sometimes that can be ulcer related, sometimes it can be saddle related, and sometimes those two are going together. So that's kind of the first thing that you can look for. Secondly, under saddle, when you're starting to get some resistance that you hadn't been having before. I notice this a lot, especially when the saddles are starting to get either a little narrow or they're starting to pinch.
Because the horse has muscle now.
Either because the horse has muscle now, or possibly the flocking has gotten flat, so that balance is a little too low in the front.
Okay.
I notice it mostly in the canter parts, because those are moments when they're having to rock back and then lift up and go forward into those gaits. And so usually, if they're getting restricted there, you'll start to either get some ears pinned back or they're starting to buck. But typically, if you want to catch it really quickly, just notice those kind of subtle differences when you're starting to get resistance that you weren't having before. That's usually a good time to indicate that it could be saddle related, it could be something else, but that's a time where you could kind of start making those little check marks.
Perfect. And do you charge to come out and try when someone's buying a saddle? So if I wanted to buy a saddle for my horse and I just ask you to come out and kind of describe his back, do you charge to come out to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
That is part of like a saddle fit consultation.
Okay.
And a lot of times what I'll do for those, if someone who is saddle shopping, I'm not brand affiliated. I personally am an independent saddle fitter. I do not carry any brands personally myself. I work, in my situation, I work with two of our local businesses, M&M Tack Shop and Highline and Fineline Tack, based out of Chapel Hill. So I work with those two in terms of having access to their inventory. We have very good working relationships that have worked out really well. For me, it takes one step back from me as the person who is not trying to sell you something that I necessarily have, so that way I feel like the buyer kind of knows I'm not pushing anything on you in particular. I'm just bringing things out that I think will work, and you always ultimately have that final decision once we kind of narrow it down. So yeah, there is a charge for that because there's a lot of time in assessment, because usually I want you to send me photos too, so I at least have an idea of what your horse looks like, so I can bring out appropriate items and that are also within your budget. Key is to be very honest and upfront with your budget. Like, if you want to only spend $1,500, tell me that's what you want to spend. But if you could really spend more than that, tell me what your honest budget is, so that way I bring out appropriate things. And I don't leave that one that might be a little bit priced out of your budget, but actually it was realistically.
The next question is, what do you put on the saddles to maintain their condition?
Okay. So for me, I have two favorites, and I have kind of two philosophies when it comes to that. So if I have a saddle that's newer and already in pretty good condition, then my favorite is the Oakwood leather conditioner. It's not as heavy, and it's really nice and refined. It has some beeswax in it. It does a really good job of conditioning. It's not thick and heavy. If I have a saddle that's thirsty and needs to be reconditioned, in that situation, I really like the EFAL and EFAX products. So I like the Leader Balm. No, not the Leader Balm. Well, I do like that one. But the liquid one, the name is escaping me at the moment, but it's in the little bottle. It's a liquid. It kind of strips everything first, gets all the nice dirt off, and then I follow that with the Leader Balm that's in the tub. It's in a brown tub called EFAX.
I love that stuff.
Leader Balm stuff. That is my favorite when they're thirsty, because it's a very rich and heavy product, and that I use that more for the reconditioning. Once it's kind of brought back to life, I like the Oakwood because it's not quite as heavy and dense, and it just does a really good job of kind of keeping that maintained.
But you don't like oils?
I don't like oils unless it's super dry. If it's one that has really been left out to dry, that I'll use some oil on. Otherwise, I like the wax conditioners because you have more control over how much you're putting on and where you're putting it.
How often would you say you would balm your saddle?
I would say probably at least